as we design our websites, we're often thrown into becoming content editors and writing content for our web pages. And even if our clients do give us content, more than often, it's bad content that we have to rewrite anyways. So I wanted to go over a few recommendations and things you should follow when writing content for the web. Number one, avoid long blocks of text. Okay. One thing you can use is this columns tag here. And if I was to take this away, for example, and run that, you can see how this big long body of text, it's harder to read this than it would be these 4 columns of text, which are essentially the same thing. And so just taking your text and breaking it up into columns makes things significantly easier to read for users. You also want to make sure you're using shorter paragraphs on those columns as well. You don't want super crazy long paragraphs. Bullet points are another item that I use a lot that just kind of direct the eye to those items. When you look at a big long page of text, if maybe you're looking at a textbook or something like that, if there are some bullet points on there, typically your eyes will be drawn to those first. And so that's a really good technique you can use to disseminate information. The other thing is use headings and subheadings. You know, by putting the headings on these, it kind of helps identify what the content's going to be about and makes it much easier to read and more attractive to read, I guess I should say. You also want to use common fonts that people are used to reading. Arial, Helvetica, Verdana, Times New Roman are all excellent fonts to use for a body font. The thing is when you break out to other fonts, especially like script fonts or things like that that are difficult, well, that are not, people are not used to, it makes it a lot more difficult to read. So for example, if I was to take this font here and change this to, let's say, Papyrus or something like that, can you see how more difficult that is to read? First off, it's a horrible font, but number two, breaking away from, you know, a font that people are used to reading definitely makes it more you know, difficult. I always say if your grandma can't read it from, you know, a few feet away, you're probably doing it wrong and probably shouldn't be using that kind of font. You also need to make sure you have the appropriate text size. Okay, if I come in here and say my font size is going to be, well, number one, you probably wouldn't want to be using pixels, right? Because we learned those can be displayed at different sizes depending on your browser. But you probably should stick with one rem for your body font. Now that's fine for your headers if you want them to be bigger or smaller, but for your font size, you should really stick with one rem. Not like 0.8 or 0.7 or something like that. Typically those make it harder, and going larger doesn't help it at all either. So just keep with 1 rem or 100% and make sure they are they're legible. You also want to make sure you have good contrast between your text and background. I often see students that will do you know, we could do a background color, something like, you know, maybe we want to do, I don't know, oops, I need to do something like that, a dark black. And there's really low contrast between these two, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to read this than it would be to read the other. And again, use columns, we talked about that. On your hyperlinks, you want to really be careful to say click here for something and then linking that click here. You also shouldn't be linking entire paragraphs or sentences. Really, like 1, 2, 3 words is appropriate amount, and look for those key words that are descriptive of where you're going. Last but not least, check your spelling, check your grammar. If you haven't noticed already, I had a spelling mistake in here. You know, and often when you have a spelling mistake like that or big grammar issues, it kind of kills the credibility of what you're doing. And it's easy to point out. I probably didn't even have to point that out, and I bet you a bunch of you guys already saw that, you know, right from the get-go. And so watch your spelling, run it through a spell checker, have people look at it. If that's not your thing, use some tools to double check that those work.